Louisiana's Way Home by Kate D. Camillo. Chapter 13. We sat out in the woods under a tree, and Clarence perched on one of the branches above us, and his dark feathers shone over us. It was in Elf Ear, Nebraska, in 1910, I said. What was? Said Burke. The curse, I said. That is when it all began. I ain't never heard of Elf Ear, Nebraska. It sounds like some made-up place. I am telling you a story that I have never told to anybody else, I said. If you intend to listen to it, you can't doubt everything I say. Otherwise, there is no point in my telling you it. I had eaten the entire package of peanut butter crackers, and most of the crackers with cheese. I intended to eat the O. Henry bar for dessert. Dang, you are hungry, said Burke. I am perpetually hungry. This is what Granny says. I can make you a bologna sandwich if you want, says Burke. My house ain't far from here. Bologna is what they eat in the country home, and the county home is the place of no return. Burke shrugged. I don't know about the county home. Granny has been warning me about the dangers of the county home for my entire life. Okay, said Burke. All I'm saying is that I can make you a bologna sandwich if you want one, if you're still hungry. Well, I said. I was still hungry. Come on, said Burke. You can tell me about the Elf Ears later. Elf Ear, it's a place. Elf Ear, Nebraska. Yeah, he said, come on, let's go to my house and make a sandwich. I ate the O. Henry bar while I walked behind Burke through the woods. The candy bar was chocolatey and caramely, and it was maybe the sweetest and best thing I had ever eaten in my entire life. I started to feel somewhat hopeful about the universe and my place in it, even if I was headed off to eat bologna, meat of the county home, food of despair. I love bologna! Burke made me 3 sandwiches. They had bologna and orange cheese and mayonnaise, and they were on white bread, and he stacked the sandwiches up on one top of the other and put them on a blue plate, and we sat in the dining room at a glass-top table, and I ate the sandwiches one by one without stopping. Granny had always spoken poorly of bologna, but these bologna sandwiches tasted so good that it was just one more reason for me to doubt Granny and the truth of her utterances. And by that I mean this. If you were the kind of person who lies about something as small as bologna, what would stop you from lying about bigger, more important things? Burke stared at me while I ate. Dang, you can eat a lot. Granny says I need to keep my strength up, I said. That's your granny, that old lady who don't never once come out of the room with a good night? Yes, she recently had all her teeth pulled. She is working to regain her strength. Burke nodded. From the glass-top table in the dining room, I could see over a field and into the woods. It was late afternoon and the light was fading. Sometimes when the light starts to fade, I get a terrible feeling of loneliness, like maybe I am the only person in the world. One time I confessed this to Granny, and she told me I shouldn't take everything so personally. She said, Louisiana Elefante, the light has been fading since the dawn of time, and it will continue fading long after we are gone. It has nothing to do with you. Still, it makes me sad when the light goes. Burke sat across the table from me. There was the sound of a clock ticking, and from outside I could hear a crow calling. Is that Clarence? I asked Burke. Yeah, he said. He gets mad when I'm inside the house too long. He misses me, I reckon. I am very far from home, I said. Well, all right, says Burke. Where's home? I am now going to tell you the story of the curse, I said. Okay, said Burke. I need to tell you this story. Okay, said Burke. I'm listening. It was in Elf Ear, Nebraska, and the year was 1910, and my granny was 8 years old, and her father was the most elegant and deceitful magician that ever lived. Your granddaddy was a magician? Said Burke. My great-grandfather, I said, and my great-grandfather, my granny's father, was the magician's assistant. They traveled all over the country. They performed magic together. It was like being in a magic. It was like being in a circus, said Burke. It was like being in a magic act, I said. But what matters is that I'm telling you about the curse. And the curse began on a stage in Elf Ear, Nebraska. My great-grandfather pulled my great-grandmother out of a hat, a small hat. He made her appear, and then he made her disappear back into the hat, just like a rabbit. Burke was staring at me, listening. He had very blue eyes. What happened next? He asked. What happened next was that my great-grandfather uttered the fateful words, I will now saw my lovely wife in half, and put her back together again, for I am Hiram Elefante the Great. That was his name? Hiram Elefante the Great? What kind of name is that? It was his name, I said. The important thing is that the magician's assistant climbed into the box, and Hiram Elefante nailed the box shut, and then he took a saw, and he sawed that box in half, with my great-grandmother in it. She was cut in two. Sundered. Do you understand? Burke nodded. Yeah, he said. It was a magic trick. He sawed her in half, and then he put her back together again. Well, that is what the audience thought would happen. That is what everyone anticipated. But it was not what happened. I stared at Burke, and he stared at me. Well, he said, what happened? My great-grandfather sawed my great-grandmother in half, and then he walked away. He left my great-grandmother on the stage, sawed in two. He walked out of the theater in Elf Ear and kept walking. No one ever saw him again. And what about your great-granny? Someone else had to put her back together. A man from the audience who knew some magic. And then the two of them ran away together, and my granny was left entirely alone. Dang, said Burke. Is this a true story? Of course it's true. What happened to your granny? She got sent to the county home, an orphanage. And that is the story of the curse of the Sundering and how it has been passed down through the generations. And now that curse is on my head. Well, said Burke, what have you got? Well, you've got to undo the curse, right? That's what I would do. Undo it, I said. How would I undo that? I don't know. There's got to be a way. Maybe what you do is go and find another magician to work some magic, different magic, magic that puts things back together. Outside somewhere, Clarence called out. Burke and I sat there and stared at each other, and even though I was filled with crackers and bologna and an O. Henry's bar, I felt very empty and sad. Could the curse really be undone? I doubted it. I don't think Burke Allen fully comprehended the depth and breadth of the curse upon my head. I suppose I could go back and check on Granny, I said. Maybe she is hungry. Maybe you could make her a bologna sandwich. All right, said Burke. I didn't know if Granny would eat a bologna sandwich. In fact, a bologna sandwich might enrage her. Maybe I was hoping to enrage her. I don't know. But in any case, Burke went into the kitchen and came back a minute later with two bologna sandwiches wrapped up in a paper towel. I was waiting to see what kind of a person he was. He was the kind of person who, if you asked him for one of something, gave you two instead. We went back outside and stood in front of Burke's house, which was painted as pink as cotton candy on the outside. It was all by itself in the woods on the outside, with no other houses nearby. Burke whistled and Clarence came flying out of the woods and landed on Burke's shoulder. And I thought to myself that my life would never be truly complete until I could whistle and have a crow come flying out of the trees directly to me. "There's going to be a carnival at the church on Saturday," said Burke. "A carnival isn't a circus, but it's still something. And it's mostly fun. There's games and rides." "Oh," I said, "you and me could go." "I need to know something," I said. "This is important. What direction is south from here?" Burke pointed without even having to stop and consider it. It was very impressive. "That way," he said. "Why?" I turned and looked south. Clarence raised his wings and lowered them, but he stayed on Burke's shoulder. "Why?" said Burke again. "Because south is where Florida is," I said. "So?" said Burke. "Florida is where I am from. That's where my friends are. That's where Archie the cat is. That's where Buddy the dog is. And that is where I need to get back to." How do you aim to get there?" "I don't know," I said. "I will figure out a way. I am wily and resourceful, according to Granny." We started to walk back to the good night sleep tight. Clarence flew ahead of us, stopping to wait up on tree branches, looking down at us and laughing and laughing. Maybe crows are right about the world. Maybe everything is funny. That is the end of chapter 13. Chapter 14. Speaking of funny, when I walked into room 102 of the Goodnight Sleep Tight and said, "Granny, I have brought you 2 bologna sandwiches," Granny did not say anything at all. I expected her to curse the very existence of bologna, or to tell me she was not hungry, but Granny said nothing. "Granny?" I said. I went over to the bed. I pulled back the covers. Granny was not there. I have never been so surprised in my life. "Granny?" I said in a very loud voice. I looked in the bathroom. I looked under the bed. And then I ran out of room 102 and looked for the car. And guess what? It was gone. I went back into the room and saw that Granny's plaid suitcase was not on her luggage rack. I felt dizzy. The whole room was spinning. I couldn't breathe. Where would Granny go without me? I was the reason for her existence. She had told me so many times. She said that what kept her alive was looking out for me and teaching me to make most of my gifts. I bent over and put my hands on my knees. I took deep breaths. I looked around the spinning room, and that is when I saw it. An envelope with my name on it. Inside the envelope, there were several folded up pieces of paper. I unfolded them very, very slowly. "Dear Louisiana." Those were the words written at the top of the very first page. It was a letter. Granny had written me a letter. She had never written me a letter. And why in the world would she write me a letter? From the very first minute of my life that I would recall, Granny was with me and I with her. Why would you write a letter to someone when you were always and forever by their side? You wouldn't. Unless, of course, you intended not to be by their side anymore. I opened the palm tree curtains and sat down on the bed and stared out the window. I heard a rustling. Was it wings? Was Clarence the crow somewhere nearby? Had he come to save me? And then, my goodness, I realized the rustling was the letter. My hand was trembling, and the pages of the letter were brushing up against each other. It was at this point that I understood that a tragedy was in the process of occurring. The sky outside the window of the good night sleep tight was blue black, and the curtains had palm trees inside of peaches. And Granny was gone, and I could feel the world whizzing past me. I once had a teacher named Mrs. McGregor who said that the world was turning very slowly on its axis. It is moving infinitesimally, said Mrs. McGregor. Infinitesimally. She said the word very slowly. She stretched it out. Infinitesimally. So that you could hear the word infinite in the word when she used it. Mrs. McGregor always had dried spit in the corner of her mouth, but she was a very patient woman, and she was a truthful person. I liked Mrs. McGregor. I could not imagine her telling a lie. But here is the thing. It did not feel to me like the earth was moving infinitesimally. It felt like it was hurtling and jerking its way through a lonely darkness. To my way of thinking, you never knew when the earth was going to lurch and go somewhere entirely unexpected. There was nothing infinitesimal about it. I guess that is what the curse of Sundering will do to you if it has been placed upon your head. It will change how the earth itself moves. Oh, Rainey and Beverly. Oh, Archie and Buddy. Oh, Granny. I looked down at the letter in my trembling hands. I started to read. Chapter 15. Dear Louisiana, I read, you must be brave. Well, that first sentence made me mad. I was tired of being brave, just like I was tired of imposing and persevering. But I went on reading. I am going to tell you some things you must know that perhaps you should have known all along. I could feel my heart sink all the way down to my toes. I knew it. I knew that this was a letter of goodbye. I could tell it was almost more than I could bear. But I had to bear it, didn't I? What choice did I have? I read on. I know that you know the story of the curse, but what I have never told you is that I saw my father that night, the night that he sawed my mother in half, and walked away without putting her back together again. I was standing at the window of the hotel room. I was waiting for the two of them to return from the theater. I was up late, later than I should have been. I looked out the window of the hotel room and I saw my father walking down the street toward the hotel. He was alone. His magician's cloak was floating out behind him, and I knew suddenly that he was going to tell me something important, but I did not know what it was. I could not imagine, you see. I could not imagine. My father stopped and looked up at the window of the hotel. I waved at him. He looked at me, and then he turned and walked away without saying anything to me at all. And that moment, when my father left without telling me anything, is the moment when the curse truly began. That was the true moment of sundering. I closed my eyes. I could see small Granny young Granny standing at the window of the hotel room, watching her father turn and walk away from her. It made my heart hurt. Poor Granny. At least she had all her teeth then. I read on. In these last days, my father has appeared to me again and again in Florida. I woke from a dream of him calling my name, speaking to me at last. And I knew then that we must go to Elfear immediately. That is why we left in such haste. Louisiana, I felt as if I was being summoned. And now every time I close my eyes, I see him, my father. He appears out of the fog of my mind and he calls my name, and his tone is ominous. It has become clear to me what I must do. I must go and confront the curse. I must do it alone. Was it a good idea for a toothless, feverish granny to go and confront the curse by herself? Without me? Well, I did not think so. But then Granny wasn't soliciting my opinion, was she? I don't know what I will find in Elf Ear, Louisiana. I don't know what darkness awaits me, but I know that I must keep you safe from it. I wish that I could say goodbye to you in person, but I fear that you would insist on coming with me. Worse, I fear that I would not have the courage to go, and I must go. Oh, I did not want to leave you as my father left me. I want you to know that you are loved. I want to tell you the truth of who you are. Brace yourself, Louisiana. I looked up. I stared at the palm tree curtains and the dark world outside. I braced myself. Your parents were never known to me. What? I said out loud. I looked around room 102. What are you talking about, Granny? Of course my parents were known to you. My parents were the Flying Elefantes. They were famous far and wide. They were beautiful and talented, you have told me many times. You and I are not related at all, Louisiana. We were tossed together by the winds of fate. Your parents were not the Flying Elefantes. They were not trapeze artists. I do not know who your parents were. That is a mystery I will not be able to unravel for you. Something large and dark had entered room 102 of the good night sleep tight, and the large dark thing was sitting right on top of my chest. I could not breathe. If my parents were not the Flying Elefantes, then who was I? Read on, whispered the dark thing on my chest. Read on. After the curse befell me, I was sent to the county home. After the county home, after I survived that miserable, miserable place, I entered the world as an adult. I moved through it as a solitary being, and I did not mind it at all. I was glad to be alone. Yes, glad. For if you are alone, then you do not need to worry about the curse of Sundering. I had certain musical gifts. When I was very young, my mother taught me to play the piano. And so that is what I did. I played the piano at churches. I gave recitals and lessons. And I worked at other jobs, small jobs, clerking, typing, cashiering. I got by. Listen, Louisiana, listen. Now we come to you. When I lived in New Orleans, I worked for a time at the Louisiana Five and Dime. I sat up straight. The dark thing on my chest sat up straight too, but it did not go away from me. One evening, I walked out into the alley and I heard the whimper of a small animal. I knew what was coming. Read, the dark thing said. Read. I read, "It was you, Louisiana. You were impossibly small. You were wrapped in a flowered blanket. Someone had put you on top of a pile of cardboard boxes and left you there. Understand, I never wanted a child. I had no need to rescue anyone. But I picked you up, and you smiled at me. You smiled, Louisiana. I knew what it meant to be abandoned, left behind. I knew, too, what would happen if I notified the authorities. I knew that you would go to the orphanage, to a county home. I could not let that happen. So this is the truth. These are the facts. I picked you up. You smiled at me. I named you for where you were found, and caring for you has been the greatest joy of my life. I was named after a five and dime? I was not an elefante? Someone had left me in an alley? I couldn't breathe. I would give anything to stay here with you, but the curse will not be denied. See how it is even now doing its dark work and pulling us apart? Please understand, I am old and I am very unwell, and I fear there is little time left in me. My father will not stop calling my name. I must go and face the curse. I will try to return, but in case something prevents me, in case my time is too short, I want to tell you this. Do not come after me. The curse is too dangerous. I wish that I had time to see you into safety, but you are wily, resilient. You are not alone in the world. You will find a way. And please remember this. Someone put you down in that alley, but I picked you up. And perhaps what matters when all is said and done is not who puts us down, but who picks us up. I have loved you with the whole of myself, Louisiana. You will always and forever be loved by me. I have gone to Elf Ear to set us both free. Do not forget that you can sing. I love you. And that's the end of chapter 15. Chapter 16. Get off me, I said to the dark thing on my chest. Please get off me. But it did not move. I stood up. I got hold of the letter. I picked up the bologna sandwiches and I staggered out of room 102. I went into the office of the Goodnight Sleep Tight because I did not know where else to go. Bernice was behind the counter. A tragedy was occurring. The darkness had descended and Granny was gone, but Bernice's hair was still in curlers. Here is something I have learned. You should never expect help from someone who perpetually has their hair in curlers. But what was I to do? Where could I turn? I didn't even know who I was. Good evening, I said to Bernice. What now? Said Bernice. I guess it was just impossible for her to be a friendly person, no matter how hard she tried. Not that she was trying. I am wondering if you have seen my granny recently, and if she gave you any information, I said. Seen your granny? Said Bernice. What information? Don't tell me your granny is missing. She is not missing, I said. Then why are you looking for her? Said Bernice. She narrowed her eyes. I narrowed my eyes back at her, but the dark thing was still on my chest, and it was very hard for me to breathe. I turned away from Bernice. I bent over and put my hands on my knees. I closed my eyes and concentrated on breathing. Who am I? Who am I? That was the question my heart kept beating out. When I opened my eyes, I saw the alligator staring at me. He was an incredibly ferocious looking alligator, but he also seemed perplexed, as if he were thinking, how in the world did a dangerous man eating alligator like me end up dead in the office of the Good Night Sleep Tight Motel? There is something very sad about contemplating a perplexed stuffed alligator when it is dark outside and you do not know who you are or who your parents were or anything about yourself at all. What are you doing? Said Bernice. Well, yes, that was the question, wasn't it? I am communing with the alligator, I said. Oh, said Bernice. You're communing with the alligator? Of course you are. I suppose next you'll be speaking with the vending machine. And that reminds me. Let me tell you something about Burke Allen and that vending machine. He makes little quarter-shaped pieces of metal down at that machine shop of his father's, and then he puts the metal into the vending machine and takes what he wants without paying for a thing. That is theft. That is a crime. Burke Allen, who gave me 2 sandwiches when I only asked for one. Burke Allen, who had a crow named Clarence. I could feel the dark thing on top of me lifting up, peeling away. Burke Allen would help me. Burke Allen would know what to do. I stood up straight. I turned around and faced Bernice. Thank you very much, I said, even though she had not helped me with anything at all. Be polite up to the last minute. Be polite until they absolutely force you not to be. That was what the woman named Granny always advised. I left the Good Night Sleep Tight office and I did not look back. That is the end of chapter 16.